Good evening. I'm speaking to you tonight to give you a report on the state of our nation's economy. I regret to say that we're in the worst economic mess since the Great Depression. A few days ago, I was presented with a report I'd asked for, a comprehensive audit, if you will, of our economic condition. You won't like it. I didn't like it. But we have to face the truth and then go to work to turn things around. And make no mistake about it, we can turn them around. We invented the assembly line and mass production, but punitive tax policies and excessive and unnecessary regulations, plus government borrowing, have stifled our ability to update plant and equipment. When capital investment is made, it's too often for some unproductive alterations demanded by government to meet various of its regulations. Excessive taxation of individuals has robbed us of incentive and made overtime unprofitable. We once produced about 40% of the world's steel. We now produce 19%. We were once the greatest producer of automobiles, producing more than all the rest of the world combined. That is no longer true. We must not be timid. We will restore the freedom of all men and women to excel and to create. We will unleash the energy and genius of the American people, traits which have never failed us. We can create the incentives which take advantage of the genius of our economic system. A system, as Walter Lippmann observed more than 40 years ago, which for the first time in history gave men, quote, a way of producing wealth in which the good fortune of others multiplied their own, unquote. Our aim is to increase our national wealth so all will have more, not just redistribute what we already have, which is just a sharing of scarcity. Thank you, and good night.
Yes, we are back here on WLTH 1370 AM, straight out of the cannon. Issues and Answers Friday, right here. It is May the 31st, 2024. The future's here. The future's now. 6:45 in the PM. That voice you heard is that of history's greatest monster, as I deemed him a few months ago. Ronald Reagan, the 40th president of the United States. He is giving his, basically what is called his Reaganomics speech. And what are Reaganomics? Reaganomics was the idea that if we let the rich get really rich by cutting their taxes, it will trickle down. It'll trickle down to the rest of us and, you know, feed the rest of us. And ultimately, studies have now come out to show that that is absolutely not the truth. This story is from, shout out to our friends at, well, CBS News. But I'm not the biggest fan of CBS News, but this is a good story. Tax cuts for the wealthy have long drawn support from conservative lawmakers and economists who argue that such measures will trickle down and eventually boost jobs and incomes for everyone else. But a new study from the London School of Economics says 50 years of such tax cuts have only helped one group of people: the rich. Oh, I'm shocked. I'm absolutely shocked. The new paper by David Hope of the London School of Economics and Julian Lindbergh of King's College in London examines 18 developed countries from Australia to the United States over a 50-year period from 1965 to 2015. The study compared countries that passed tax cuts in a specific year, such as the United States did in 1982, when Ronald Reagan gave that speech, where he talked about how he's going to slash taxes for the wealthy, with those that didn't, and then examine their economic outcomes. Per capita gross domestic product and unemployment rates were nearly identical after 5 years in countries that slashed taxes on the rich and in those that didn't, the study found. But the analysis discovered one major change. The incomes of the rich grew much faster in countries where tax rates were lower. So that is why we've seen the explosion in wealth. where we have people worth hundreds of billions of dollars currently in this country. And about 8 billionaires have as much wealth as like half the country by itself. The richest man in America right now is Elon Musk with $251 billion. That's with a B. $251 billion. Now, 1983, the richest man in America, J. Paul Getty, guess how much money he had? Just guess. Yeah, he had $2 billion. J. Paul Getty had $2 billion. That's it. $2 billion. So you look at the amount of wealth that has just exploded in the post-Reagan era amongst the wealthy elites in this country, and you will see that what we've seen over the last 40 years of Reaganomics, because all of our presidents have participated in it. When Bill Clinton was deregulating Wall Street in the 90s and not regulating derivatives and letting Wall Street go crazy, that was a part of that. So, I mean, this is what we see from all of our politicians now, regardless of whether they are Democrats, whether they are Republicans. This is why I say that none of these people specifically work for us. They don't work for us. You know, J. Paul Getty's $2 billion back then is the equivalent of about $6 billion today. So even with inflation, that's nowhere near $251 billion. Now, per capita gross domestic product and unemployment rates were nearly identical after 5 years in countries that slashed taxes on the rich and those that didn't. But the analysis discovered one major change was the incomes of the rich grew much faster in countries where tax rates were lower. Instead of trickling down to the middle class, tax cuts for the rich may not accomplish much more than help the rich keep more of their riches and exacerbate income inequality. The research indicates. This is Bernie Sanders some years ago talking about Reaganomics. This was years ago. Now, mind you, the Democratic Party did everything possible so that this man could not be president because they support Reaganomics.
And this chart talks about distribution of average income growth during expansions and what the bottom 90% received versus what the top 10% of families received. And we go back from the period of 49 to 53, 54 to 57, 58 to 60, 61 to 69, 70 to 73, 75 to 79, 82 to 90, 91 to 2000, 2001 to 2007, 2009 to 2012. That's the last information we have. And what this chart shows is that in the last 3 decades after World War II, the vast majority of Americans did well when the economy did well. This is the percentage of new income that went to the bottom 90%, and this is what the top 10% got. They did okay. 10% did pretty well. They got 20% of all new income. But the bottom 90% got 80% of the income. And then 54 to 57 went down a little bit, but the bottom 90% did pretty well. Bottom 90% did pretty well. Bottom 90% did pretty well. Bottom 90% begins to do less well, but they're still getting a majority of the new income. Whoa! What happens in 1982? Well, Ronald Reagan is president, and the good news is we are into trickle-down economics. And here it is. And this chart tells it all. This is what the top 20% got. This is what the top 10% got. This is what the bottom 90% got. And here we are in the last number here where we are today. And lo and behold, the top 10% gets it all. Gets it all. And frankly, this is a metaphor. This is an example of exactly what trickle-down economics is all about.
Right. There's Bernie Sanders showing exactly why he didn't get to be president and why the Democratic Party chose Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden over him. Because he actually talked about trickle-down economics and the effect it was having on our communities. So this is why they rigged it against him, because all of their donors, their corporate donors that donate to them, don't want to pay more taxes. So they get somebody like Joe Biden in office, or what they wanted to have Hillary Clinton in office, somebody who will pay lip service and talk all this crap about the poor and about the working class, but not actually do anything that would really truly disturb anything, just like Bill Clinton in the 90s. The whole time I was growing up, I believed, oh man, the economy was so good in the 90s, man. The economy was just so great, man. The one thing that nobody can say about Bill Clinton is that the economy wasn't good. Now, looking back at it, I go, oh. That's why they always claim the economy was so good. He was deregulating Wall Street. He was letting them gamble with grandma's retirement money. Oh, he ran that woman out of town who told him that he needed to regulate derivatives because if he didn't, that the economy would collapse within a decade. And guess what? The economy collapsed exactly 1 decade after the woman said this. Brooksley Born is her name. I think I actually did a segment on her some years ago. I had to look that up. If I haven't, then I will definitely do that. I will do that whenever I get the opportunity to do that, because she's an interesting person who tried to stop us from driving off the cliff that we are driving off of. But you see, this is what sent us down the road that we've ended up on. Virtually every negative economic factor that we have, especially if you're poor, especially if you're working class, especially if you're black, all of the problems really start germinating in the 1980s and the early 80s with Donald Trump. Now, because the analysis ends in 2015, this research did not include President Donald Trump's massive tax overhaul, which he signed into law in late 2017, and which slashed taxes for the rich and corporations while providing a moderate cut for the middle class. And that's exactly why whenever I see a lot of dummies who claim that Donald Trump is some sort of anti-establishment hero who's fighting back against the machine and he's doing that, no. Donald Trump is a gangster. And he has problems with other gangsters because he is messy. As Jonathan used to always say, Jonathan Booz used to always say, Trump's just messy. That's why they don't like Trump. Because Trump gives the rich the tax cuts too that they want. He's no better than Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or Ronald Reagan or any of these other people. He is not some anti-establishment hero either. None of these people are coming to save you folks. The most unpopular thing Donald Trump ever did in his presidency, and you can look this up, the most unpopular Donald Trump ever was in his presidency, even during COVID, was when he passed that tax cut for the rich in 2017. That was his low point before COVID. And yet, he still made sure that the rich got their tax cut. All of his rich friends got their tax cuts. Now, already, Donald Trump's tax cuts have lifted the fortunes of the ultra-rich, according to research from two prominent economists, Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zuckman of the University of California at Berkeley. For the first time in a century, the 400 richest American families paid lower taxes in 2018 than people in the middle class. Think about that. The 400 richest American families paid lower taxes in 2018 than people in the middle class. Wow. Now, the careful new research from the London School of Economics suggests, indeed, that tax increases on the wealthy should be considered post-COVID. And I'm like, yeah, duh. Warren Buffett for many years bragged about paying less taxes than his secretary. Are you serious? Are you serious? Now, the economy was humming along before the pandemic struck the nation in March, with an unemployment rate that was at its lowest point in about half a century. At some point, we'll have to get into how unemployment rates are a complete joke. They're not real. They are completely made up and formulated by the government, but that's neither here nor there. We'll talk about that later. Conservative think tanks such as American Enterprise Institute pointed to Mr. Trump's tax cuts as an engine for stronger economic growth. Yet even so, millions of American families struggled to find jobs that paid living wages, while the cost of essentials such as healthcare, housing, and education increased at a far faster rate than the typical income. Even before the pandemic, income inequality had reached its highest point in 2015. In 50 years. Had reached its highest point in 50 years, according to the census. In 2020, the pandemic just worsened income inequality across all spectrums, touching racial, gender, and educational divides. When the economy shut down in March, workers who couldn't transition to remote work, typically lower paid employees involved in retail, service, and hospitality jobs, were hit the absolute hardest. We saw this in real time. Jeff Bezos, and I talked about this on the show before, he made so much money during the pandemic. That he could have paid every single Amazon employee, close to 1 million people in this country, $100,000 just out of his own pocket. He could have just said, look, I want to give every Amazon employee, close to 1 million of them, $100,000 a piece. And he would have been just as rich as he was before the pandemic started. Think about that. He was the richest man in the world before the pandemic started, made so much money that he could have given 1 million people $100,000 a piece and still been just as rich as he was before. That is who runs our country. That is who is running our country. Those people. But they want you to think that some, poor black folks here in Gary who are on welfare are your enemy, or like, like people just don't want to work no more. That's the one I like. Oh, people just don't want to work anymore. No, people don't want to be exploited anymore. These people make that type of money while people today are asked to work for less than their grandparents did when you factor in inflation and productivity. If the minimum wage kept pace with inflation and productivity like it was supposed to be, from the 1960s, the minimum wage would be $23 right now. I'm sorry, $24 right now. People in the 60s were working for the equivalent of $24. That's why you were able to buy a new car after working at the Dairy Queen. That's why you were able to pay your way through college by working at McDonald's. People working at McDonald's today can't buy no $100,000 university education after a few years. People used to go work in the mill for a summer and pay their whole school year education. That is what it used to be like in the early 70s and late 60s. Now you can work a full-time job and still have to live with your mama. That's why people don't want to work these crappy jobs. And it's also these people can hoard all the wealth. At the same time, white-collar workers generally fared better as they were more likely to maintain their jobs as they shifted to remote work. Investors also benefited as the stock market rallied on hopes for an economic recovery, a development that doesn't help most low and middle class workers. Only about half of the U.S. population is invested in the stock market through their retirement and savings account. And even more than 80% of all stocks are owned by the richest 10%. More than 80% of all stocks are owned by the richest 10%. This is why I always like when Crystal Ball from Breaking Point says that basically the stock market is a graph of rich people's feelings. And that's what it is. It is a graph of rich people's feelings. It's not real, folks. It is their feelings. But unfortunately, they have so much wealth and power that their feelings could hurt everyone else. Since the pandemic began, the combined wealth of America's 651 billionaires has jumped by more than $1 trillion. Good Lord. Reaching $4 trillion in early December, Americans for Tax Fairness said earlier this month. Meanwhile, almost 8 million Americans have fallen into poverty since the pandemic through November, according to new data released by the University of Chicago and the University of Notre Dame. Rebuilding the economy and household wealth for low and middle class families are among the issues facing President-elect Joe Biden after he's inaugurated next month. Raising taxes on the rich and corporations could provide trillions of dollars in resources for helping the economic recovery. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. All right, folks. I know I went off the rails a little bit there, but this really teased me off. This is why I say we need alternative political movements. The Democrats and the Republicans, they are dead ends for all of us. That's neither here nor there. We're going to lighten the mood a little bit. We're going to go to a break. And when we come back, happy happies! We'll be right back after these. Straight out of the cannon!